there are a lot of people who can talk and who actually espouse very good ideals but don't know how to actually execute. And that's what was needed. Having put that in place has been tremendous. You've already seen things happening. You've already seen our tax policy come out, which I've been trying to get out for months. And you're going to see a bunch of other policies coming out very shortly so that people will not have to guess. And, you know, as you saw, Forbes said that our tax plan is the best one. They're going to be saying that about a lot of our policies, quite frankly, as they come out. Because, you know, I'm not a highly partisan person, but I'm very concerned about America. So the things that I talk about, they're not Democrat or Republican things. They're American things. The things that concern me are the divisiveness that are going on in our society, all the wedges that are being driven between the people. A house divided against itself cannot stand. And yet, you know, we have a war on women, racial wars, age wars, income wars, religious wars, everything imaginable. And previously, our strength has been our unity. And that is something that I think should be very high on the agenda for the next leader of this nation. It has not been high on the agenda most recently. I think fiscal responsibility is another thing that's very important. The current generation is the first generation in our nation's history that will be worse off than the previous generation. And the generation after that will be worse, and the one after that worse. Why? Because of our policies. As we continue to run up our national debt, as the fiscal gap continues to increase, and no one even talks about it. It's sort of like, they're just numbers. They don't matter. And yet they're impacting our society. You know, why does the Fed, central bank, have to utilize the policies it does? Why can't they raise the interest rates to a normal level? Because our national debt is so high, because the debt service on it is so high. And who does that impact the most? Average people, middle class and poor people, who now no longer have a mechanism for increasing their wealth. They used to be able to put 5% of their check in the bank every Friday and watch it grow over a few decades and have a nice nest egg and be able to retire. That's gone. The bond market doesn't work for them. The only thing that works is the stock market, but you have to have risk tolerance to be able to use that. The average American doesn't have that. Rich people do. Income cap grows. It's not because rich people are evil. It's because of this silly policy of continuing to run up our debt so that we can't adjust our monetary policies in a way that is beneficial to the average American. Also, the huge number of regulations. I'm not an anti-regulation person, but recognize what the deleterious effect of those regulations are. Every single regulation costs money in terms of goods and services. It's a very regressive tax that is imposed upon our society. And who does it hurt when you go into the store and buy a box of detergent and it costs 10 cents more because of regulation? Rich people don't notice that. Poor people don't notice it right away. Middle class notices when they get to the cash register and everything has gone up a little bit, and they don't feel that their quality of life is the same as it used to be, but can't quite put their finger on the reason why that is the case. And then you look at the deleterious effect of all the regulations. Manufacturing segment, for instance. The regulations per capita in the manufacturing industry for companies with employees of less than 50 is $34,000. It makes it really hard to compete, particularly with other countries, when we do things like that. When we have the highest corporate tax rates, of course we're going to drive business out of here. And it would be so simple for us to lower that system. That's why, you know, I've come up with a tax plan that is a flat rate across the board for everybody with no deductions and no exemptions. Because as soon as you put in a deduction or an exemption, everybody starts manipulating everything to be able to take advantage of it. And some people can take advantage of it better than others. We need something that is completely fair. And that's why I like the idea of proportionality. You know, I think God's pretty fair. And he had proportionality and tithe. He said, he didn't say if you have a bumper crop, you owe me triple tithe. He didn't say if your crops fail, you owe me nothing. And so it's a simplistic idea, but it works. and you don't get to inject your ideological preferences into it. You know, you make $10 billion a year proportionally, you pay $1 billion. You make $10 a year, you pay $1. You get the same rights and privileges. If your neighbor makes 10 times more money than you do, they pay 10 times more taxes than you do. It makes it very, very simple. And in terms of just the corporate rate, there's over $2.1 trillion overseas. If we provide a mechanism to bring that money back, it will come back. And what I've suggested is a 6-month hiatus on corporate taxes. They pay zero. We repatriate that money, the only stipulation being that 10% of it has to be used in empowerment zones and to create jobs for people who are unemployed and on welfare. It would be the biggest stimulus since FDR's New Deal and wouldn't cost the taxpayers 1 penny. Low-hanging fruit, and it gets corporate America to start thinking about investing in their communities, investing in people around them, because I really believe that it is a responsibility of the private sector to take care of the downtrodden. It is not the government's responsibility. And when the government began taking that over, that's when we started accumulating unreasonable debts. You know, Johnson's, war on poverty. How'd that work out? $19 trillion later, we have 10 times more people on food stamps, more welfare, more poverty, broken homes, crime, incarceration. Everything is not only worse, it's much worse. And it doesn't mean that the government is evil and horrible. It simply means that they're doing the wrong thing. And it's the private sector. The government can help facilitate private sector, facilitate life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but not insinuate itself into every aspect of our lives. It is not the way the system was designed. And you know, in terms of the way the system was designed, it was also designed for citizen statesmen, not for career politicians. And career politicians would have you believe that they're the only ones who can solve the problems. But you know, we got almost 9,000 years of experience in Congress, and they're not solving our problems. We need to look for people who have a long history of solving problems. You know, I have been involved in solving a lot of problems. My neurosurgical career was fraught with controversy because I tended to push the envelope. You know, for instance, with achondroplast, you know, the most common form of dwarfism, 7% of them used to die in infancy. It was a well-known problem. When I came up with a mechanism for fixing it, there was outrage. And they said, you surgeons are the ones who kill these people, because when people would go in, the area was so tight, they frequently did kill them or made them worse. But we figured out a way to do it without doing that. And I was reported to the Maryland Medical Society, the AMA. Carson's a wild man. But by that time, you know, I had done enough cases I could reveal the data. And in medicine, unlike politics, data does matter. And now, you know, it's a standard technique used all over the world, and achondroplasts no longer, 7% of them die in infancy. Same thing with brainstem tumors, with a lot of the seizure procedures. And it's not because I'm the smartest person that ever existed in the world, not by a long shot, but by working with people. A lot of people, we were able to define the problems, we were able to look at data, we were able to figure out what was going on and how to fix it. And I think that's a paradigm that works in politics as well.
This would lower taxes for the wealthiest households, and everybody would pay something. And probably it's going to increase taxes for the poorest.
Right, even the people at below the 150% poverty line have to pay something. We call it de minimis tax. It would be like $100. But that way, everybody has some skin in the game.
So, how do you sell this to the majority of Americans? Where does middle class see this benefiting them?
I think we sell it by telling people that every policy that we push is talking about equality, liberty, and justice for everybody, treating everybody the same. And, you know, the vast majority of Americans in this tax plan, as you go through it and you analyze it, very few people, if anybody, is going to be paying more. But in terms of the wealthy, you say that it gives them a big tax increase. What you have to recognize is that many of the wealthy are not paying their fair share of taxes right now. I know a lot of wealthy people I mean really wealthy people, who don't pay as much as I pay. I pay a lot because I don't have all these shelters and tax accountants and lawyers. And you know, we have costed this out. We have analyzed it all because we want to make sure that, you know, we're basically revenue neutral, that we're able to take care of all the duties of the government. Everybody needs to participate in that, and they need to participate it in a fair way. And I don't think the American people are going to be opposed to having something that treats everybody the same. If your neighbor makes 10 times more money than you do, your neighbor pays 10 times more than you do. I think people are going to like that.
Help me with the math on the revenue neutral, because PolitiFact has agreed with the statement that there's a $1 trillion shortfall. So tell me how they're wrong and it's actually revenue neutral.
Well, none of that has taken into account the tremendous spurring of the economy that this is going to create, nor has it taken into account the fact that we're going to be reducing the size of government through attrition and through cutting the various federal agency programs, which is going to be a lot more than $1.1 trillion, by the way.
It's going to be a lot more. The cuts will be more than 1.1 trillion.
It'll be a lot more.
But you're also talking about, you previously talked about increasing spending on the Strategic Defense Initiative and technology and other things to protect us. And the space program, obviously that's going to cost a lot of money. So where's that money coming from?
Well, recognize that there is an enormous amount of money that is not being tapped. You know, our country, in terms of assets, owns well more than $150 trillion. Now, if you take a well-run business and you give them $150 trillion in assets, even if they only get a 2% return on it, it's going to be an enormous amount of money. Not only are we not getting a return on our assets, we're actually paying money because we run things so inefficiently. I don't have any problem with safety nets. There's been a false narrative about me. People say, well, Carson grew up very poor, and he must have benefited from some government programs, and therefore now he wants to take them all away. What a piece of crap, you know. But, you know, people just come out with all of these lies all the time. That's probably the most disappointing part of this whole process, is the lack of integrity in the press. I mean, unbelievable stuff. I mean, I even saw an article yesterday in Yahoo News that was still talking about, you know, saying that Carson was dishonest about a class at Yale that he took where he was the most honest student. When that's already, the article has been found that showed that that was true. And they're still, you know, propagating these lies. It's just horrible. But at any rate, I have no desire to get rid of safety nets for people who need them. My emphasis is on providing ladders of opportunity to allow people to climb out of a state of dependency and become part of the fabric of America. That's where the emphasis needs to be.
Those ladders, though, it sounds like you're thinking that's a job that should be left more to the public sector.
I think the private sector, yeah, the private sector is the place where those things are done the best. It's relationships with other people. You know, there's a program, for instance, in Tennessee, where they go out and they find people, private sector, who are down and out, and they bring them into a program that they pay for, 13-week program. Clean them up, give them new clothes, you know.
This is a nonprofit type organization.
Nonprofit, yeah. And teach them what they need to know in order to hold a job. Help them get a job. Talk to their employers, work with their employees. 70% of those people wind up off the dole in less than a year. And one young lady I talked to, when they found her, she was homeless and a drug addict. When I talked to her, she was 3 months away from getting her PhD. You know, what can happen when we are willing to invest in people? And the reason that's so important is because we only have 330 million people in our country. We're competing with China with 1.4 billion, with India with over 1 billion. We can't afford to waste any of our people. We can't afford to have 20% of everybody who enters high school not finishing high school in this country. We've got to start thinking about how do we develop our people. We have to start looking at education and recognizing what works and what doesn't work. You know, when we look at the statistics, homeschoolers do best, private schoolers next best, charter schoolers next best, public schoolers worse. Now, let's not just know that, let's do something about that.
In terms of actually helping folks, you're looking more at churches and charities than, say, the federal government.
Right, the federal government, I think, can help facilitate and coordinate those efforts.
And
But
what sort of
the reason,
programs?
well, the reason I don't particularly like to have the federal government doing these things is because they don't seem to be able to resist the urge to become big bureaucratic operations.
And that's what I'm interested in. What sort of programs are you talking about that are these big bureaucratic things that need to be scaled back or maybe even eliminated?
Almost everything in government. You know, there's 645 government agencies and sub-agencies. 645. There's 4.1 million federal employees. I mean, just think about those numbers. That's staggering. And in terms of trimming them back, what I would personally do is recognize that tens of thousands of those federal employees retire each year. Don't rehire them. You can shift people around to make sure critical positions are covered, but don't keep hiring people and let that die by attrition and get down to an efficient level. With all those 645 agencies and sub-agencies, I would bring in the director of every single one of them, and I would say, cut your budget by 2 to 3%. And if you can't do that, give me your resignation right now. Anybody who tells me there's not 2 to 3% fat, I don't think they're dealing with reality. And not only that, but I would tell them you have to do it in a way that the public won't even know that you did it. Because the last time, you remember a few years ago with the sequestration, people were told to cut their budget, but I think they were told just the opposite. They said cut it in the way that the people feel it the most, so that nobody would be talking about cutting budgets anymore. That's ridiculous. And you know, the amount of money that we waste. You know, for instance, the government owns 900,000 buildings. 77,000 of those buildings are either not utilized or underutilized, and yet we lease 500 million square feet of space using taxpayers' money. Does that make any sense? You know, you see these kinds of things all over the place, and one of the things that I learned in the business world is how to be efficient, how to use money efficiently, how to use things like the Lean Six Sigma program. Some of you have probably heard of that. It's applied to corporations, Toyota, 3M. A lot of businesses have used it. Usually gets them at least 25% savings and enormous amount of efficiency. Can you imagine what happens when we start applying programs like that to the federal government? I think it needs to be done. The American people deserve to have a government that is run efficiently and not like this garbage that we have right now. It's one of the reasons that no one in the traditional political arena is enthusiastic about me. And they shouldn't be, because I'm not going to abide by all of the crap that's been going on. You know, the government needs to be returned to the people. It needs to be working for the people. It needs to be truly transparent. There needs to be some integrity. People need to believe in the government again.